Horror comics have been around for decades, but it can be a little hard to know where to start. So today, I'm going to give you 5 comic book recommendations for anyone who loves the horror genre, and this is something that's going to range from superhero stuff to classic stuff to some stuff in between. So first up, I want to get the superhero comic book out of the way, and I am going to recommend Batman: The Long Halloween. This is an obvious choice, but it's also an obvious choice for a reason, because this story really does a great job of taking you through Batman's world and including a ton of his biggest and best villains while still giving you nuance and not feeling forced. And it starts with a murder on Halloween. You go through the various holidays. Batman is trying to solve this crime, and it's not a one night thing. He doesn't solve this crime right away. So it's very fun to read this one. It's one that I am happy to reread pretty much anytime, not just during, October or Halloween time. It is a great read, and that's why I wanted to put it here first. And, I said to get it out of the way, but at the same time, it's just one of the best Batman stories, in my opinion at least. So check that one out if you are looking for something in the superhero world. So for the second pick here, we are going to go with Outcast by Robert Kirkman and Paul Azaceta. And this is a very, very dark story. You have your main character, Kyle, who is sort of being haunted by demonic possessions, and it just keeps coming up in his life over years. It's not sort of a recent thing in his life or anything. It just kind of keeps coming back around, and he helps save this boy, and he's really determined to find out what this thing is and why it keeps essentially ruining his life. He is a bit of a slob at the beginning of the story, and you can see him trying to pull himself together enough to be able to figure this out. And there are several trades for this one. It's not a one and done, which The Long Halloween is. I should have mentioned that. But this one is if you want something that's lengthier, as are, my next few recommendations. They are ones that have multiple volumes, so you can really dive into them. And the third recommendation I want to make today is Gideon Falls by Jeff Lemire and Andrea Sorrentino. The art on this from Andrea is just so, so great. It gives you a really great horror vibe if you love sort of these haunted house kind of stories. It follows this black barn that keeps popping up. It isn't in one location, so that kind of makes it even scarier because you never know when it's going to pop up again. And you have your main character Norden, who has been dreaming of this barn since he was a kid. He has a therapist in the present day who doesn't believe him until she sees it, and you have a sheriff in town who actually experiences going to the barn, being sort of sucked in by it, and she still doesn't believe it. And there's so much to dive into with this, because you have people who believe in it, you have people who don't, you have no real feel for what this barn can do at the start of the story. And again, this is one that has multiple volumes, so lots to dig into. I don't want to give too much more away here, but really, really great read for anyone who sort of loves that creepy haunted house vibe, haunted location vibe, if you will, since it's a barn, not a house. Number 4 here, I want to talk about American Vampire. This is by Scott Snyder and Stephen King for the first volume, with art by Raphael Albuquerque. And as someone who hosts a Stephen King podcast, this one was on my radar for quite a while. I did it as a bonus episode for Chat Cemetery, and I really just love the world building that they did, because in this series they are sort of diving into the evolution of vampires and the fact that there's this new type of vampire in town. And the way that the story is told, you're kind of bouncing back and forth in the first volume between Scott's writing and Stephen King's writing, and I am a huge fan of both of them, so I was immediately in on this one. If you love vampires, this is one to definitely check out. And I'm only doing 5 here, so unfortunately there are other titles like Philadelphia, for instance, that won't get mentioned in this video, but that does leave it open for me to come back and talk about some of the other horror comics that I love. But fifth and last but not least is Tales from the Crypt. Dark Horse is actually reprinting these as, EC archives, so they aren't coming from EC Comics anymore, but the way they are reprinting them and everything, they look really great. There's a wide variety of stories. I can't even break them down because there's so many in even just the first volume. But one thing I will note is that John Carpenter writes the foreword for the first volume of Tales from the Crypt. So if that isn't enough to draw horror fans in already, I don't know what will, but I still highly recommend this one. It's oversized too, so it's a little bigger than the trade paperbacks are for the other 4 comics I mentioned, but just keep that in mind. If you're buying physical copies and want something on your shelf, it might take up a little more room, but I think it is personally worth it. As you can see, I am a big fan of physical copies of books and comics. So those are my 5 horror comic book recommendations for today. Like I said, there are a ton I didn't mention, but let me know what some of your recommendations would be in the comments. And if you like this video, hit the like button, share it, hit the subscribe button. It really does help. And I will be back with more horror and comic book talk. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next time.